Transmitting of Treasury warrants 33, 33A, 34, and 34A.
Motion so moved.
I'll second.
Motion made, second, all in favor? Unanimous. Approval of minutes, meeting minutes from December 13, 2010, and February 14, 2011. Take them both together if there's no questions.
Move to approve the minutes as presented.
Motion made, second, all in favor? It's unanimous. Okay, our 7 o'clock appointment with Sharon George, Town Clerk, for discussion relative to the proposed updated precinct map. Good evening.
Hi. Good evening. All of you got the maps and the brochure that I sent out in your packets. Okay, so if you would like to work off of the map, the estimate, the draft simulation map, as they're calling it. Okay. First thing, the actual numbers for Massachusetts are going to be out around March 15th. And the numbers that were worked off of for this map, because these are estimates now, was the process that we did in 2009, where all of the town and city clerks had to put together for, in Boston, it was called the LUCA program, which was kind of before they were going to do the federal census. And with those estimates, if you look down in the bottom right-hand corner, right here, okay, this is what their estimated population in 2009. For doing each precinct, they divided up the population that was sent to them around mid-May of 2009. So there is a possibility, because I just hung up a few minutes ago with the person at the Secretary of State's office, because I wanted to make sure. So this number and these numbers could change a little bit, depending on what the actual real numbers are, and that's what's coming out on about March 14th. And then we'll have a much better idea. Also, I'm sure it's going to be very close to this. Our population, since I did this one in 2009, we've probably gone up maybe 300-400 residents since then. So right now I think it's about 22,718, somewhere around there. So now this is the precinct map that we use right now at all of the precincts, because it has all of the names, and this was revised in August of 2009. Because that was the last time the Board of Selectmen and Town Meeting approved new streets. Last year we didn't have any new streets that were approved. But this says precinct map of 2003. It's only my guess that it may have taken them a period of time to get all of these precinct maps out once they did the census tracts and the population. So that's not a real good sign, 2003. So this year at the end of last year in November, in the Acts of 2010, Chapter 321, they passed an amendment that said that they have to do this in a much more expeditious way, so that it's not going to take 3 years, because that was another question I called him to ask him about why it took 3 years. And most of it was a backup from cities, mostly cities. Towns weren't as affected, but it affected the backup of the amount of time that it took for the district, the Attorney General's office to get back to each and every city and town. Okay. Now, from this map, this is the projected map right now that they've done, okay? And it's just a draft. So, you know, all of you will have plenty of time to look it over, digest it. When the formal numbers come out on March 15th, You may each get an email on those. I don't know how everybody's set up, but if not, I'll make sure that you get copies of everything in your packet. So you can see right here, the black grid lines are what the old precinct lines were. And the new is the color. So you can see that, say right here, most of the changes are 5, 6, 3, and 4. There's a little piece of 2 right here that's going to go into 4. And if you notice on your map this kind of jog at Bridge Lane, I don't know where, I've spoken to Bud in engineering, and I'm not sure exactly where they got that from, because that's not on our current map now. So that is something that's going to have to be addressed to correct, okay? This area here was 4, okay? It's now part of 6. 6 and 3 and 4 really have big changes to it. Big areas with a lot of residents, voters that are going to need to be notified. Okay. 5 has a little bit right here. This is kind of split this area. It's going between was 5, now is 4, was 6, now is 5. So, and everything that they're doing is running along either Route 93, along a river, or something like that. They try to keep everything as even as possible. And if you look at the estimated populations, you can see that everybody's at around 3,700, some a little bit more, some a little bit less, okay? Right here. And this will reflect, once this map is completely done the way that you want it to be, we have to submit it to the group that's going to be reviewing it. It's the Attorney General, a Secretary of State designee, and also a Governor's designee. So they will be the ones, once everything is said and done, that all certified copies of all maps voted by the Selectmen will be sent to them for approval. And again, they're going to try to move that up considerably. Now, they can reject plans. I'm told that they really don't do that often, because usually once the plan gets to their committee, it's pretty much been gone through several times at that point, okay? And you all don't vote on it until you're happy with it, basically. Okay, and so you can see from these precinct maps over here, I've kind of drawn some lines that there's going to be some big changes around from in 3 that's now going to be 4, and over here. And all of those people have to be notified, all the voters have to be notified 20 days before an election, okay? And the first election that we'll be having is the presidential primary, where this will come into play. And all adopted maps will take effect as of December 31st of this year. Okay, now, if you have some questions, I'm happy to take them at this point.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
Yes, a comment and a question at once. I know that I just heard you say that the folks who were affected by this would have to get notice 20 days before the election that it would be effective. So I just wanted to restate that in case anybody lost sight of that for a moment. And it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of just the practicality and polling locations, it seems to me that the changes between the 2 and 4 line are probably most significant in that regard, along with the changes between 4 and 6.
Right.
Because that would change not only where they, the list that they check when they win, but the polling location itself.
Exactly.
So I just wanted to make sure I got it right in terms of what the possible changes are in terms of reviewing the map, and then just to reiterate that people will get actual notice before the election.
Every voter that is affected by the re-precincting will get a letter from the town clerk's office stating that their precinct and/or polling place will be changing. And it won't be, we won't wait to do it until next January of 2012. We're going to do it as soon as everything is approved by the committee. It's called the, I can't remember all the letters, the LEDRC committee. And basically, it's just those 3 people that I mentioned. And they're going to be reviewing all of the maps and all certified votes taken by City Council's Board of Aldermen and Board of Selectmen. So as quickly as they get it back and say that all of our changes have been approved, then, you know, I will start notifying people after that.
Okay. No, I think that's it. I mean, this isn't like some redistricting at different levels of government that may have some, you know, significant political ramifications. This is basically a numbers game, keeping every precinct within 5% margin of error, and it's driven by the census tract. So there's, you know, not a whole lot of creativity that goes into it, I would think, other than just making sure the lines are drawn in the places where they can be.
Massachusetts does lose 1 House of Representative member. We had 10, now we'll have 9 because of our population decrease. So, thank you very much.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay,
Yeah,
sure.
Mike, are you set?
Thank you.
Yeah. Related to what you were talking about, at redistricting at higher legislative levels, do you know if at the state level, do they look at our precincts at all in creating the districts at the legislative level?
It's by population. For the House of Representatives, it has to, each, I think it's 39,000 plus residents have to be in one area. For a Senate, it's 158,000, like at the state level.
Yeah, so the lines that we draw for our precincts really...
That's at the state level. I'm not sure actually what the federal, they didn't, I'm not sure exactly what the federal.
And that's fair, but so we're really talking about 2 separate processes here.
Right.
Additionally, just to maybe make you repeat yourself, if I may, you mentioned a plus-minus factor, I think, of 5%, Mr. Newhouse, and I see 3% min-max, and I'm a little puzzled about where 3% comes in relative to 5%.
Okay, our target population for each precinct, the number of residents, okay, is 3,727. The minimum that could be there is 3,615, and the maximum to make all of this work is 3,839. What they try to do is to be as equal as possible, because that also affects, it can affect representation at the local level. Okay? And actually, at the federal level, what happens is, because we're going to lose 1 representative in Massachusetts, I don't know how many other states are going to be losing. You know, we'll still keep our 2 senators, but we'll also lose like a counselor at that level also for representing X number of districts. So, but what they try to do is keep this as even as possible, okay? And basically, I think they did a great job trying to keep it right in the median. Now, possibly in 2020, Wilmington may need a new precinct, you know, depending on what the population numbers do and how they apportion out to each one of the precincts. It's possible because you can only have 4,000 residents per precinct.
And these, again, are based on estimates from 2009. We'll get
Right.
real, bona fide counted data for 2010 based on the census. When did you say that's coming through?
March 15th.
On March 15th. So it's likely that that number may change by plus or minus of a couple tens
Yeah.
per precinct.
It's possible.
But you don't foresee a change in the lines based on the real data that
No,
will
I
come
think it's
through?
going to be very small. I mean, maybe 400 or 500 people over, you know, it'll depend. I mean, I don't think there would be, but if there was a big influx, Avalon Drive is in Precinct 5, and their residency goes up and down constantly, their renter rolls. So, depending how many people the census callers went to see over there that, you know, were home or whatever, I don't think so, but you never know. Okay, that's why they said this is only a draft, and these are only estimate numbers. But I think they're pretty close that this would stay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you.
Anything else?
You have anything? Ray? Questions or comments from the audience? Mr. Sagal?
Yes, I'm under the impression that, I could be wrong, but precinct 3 has a different state representative than the other precincts? So people that were in 4 that are now going to be in 3, or are in 3 that are now going to be in 4 will actually have a different state representative?
Correct.
I don't know about how the Senate districts break down. If there's I think all of Wilmington is in one Senate district, but as far as a state rep.
We are First Essex, and Middlesex.
Right, but as far as state
Right, we have the
representatives,
19th,
4 of the-
Representative Maselli represents the 19th congressional, 19th district
Right.
is a part of, and Mr. Murphy is a part of the 21st.
And the 21st in Wilmington right now is only
Precinct 3.
precinct 3. Will that stay precinct 3 at this point?
Oh,
I mean, the changed precinct 3 will still be part of the 21st.
well, that I'm not sure. I'm going to have to get back to you on that one, because again, that goes with district lines and things like that. I don't know if the 19th district may change a little, or the 21st district may change a little bit, depending on other cities and towns, because I think Bruce Tarr is senator from, I know he's senator in Gloucester, all the way up here to Wilmington, so that takes in, you know, a fair amount of towns and cities on the way, so that I'm not real sure of. So I will get an answer for you, and I'll email you that answer.
The reason I bring this up is that if there's a small change between District 1 and District 5, or Precinct 1 and 5, it might mean that the people are voting for the same people but at a different location. But if they're voting for 3 to 4, it might mean that they're not only going to a different location, but they're actually voting for different people.
Different state representative, exactly. Okay. Any other questions from the audience?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for putting me on your agenda.
Okay. Our 7:15 appointment is with Kristen Costa, Lynn Anderson, Joseph Langone, and Stephen Hinckley for update status of Whispering Pines Development. Ladies, good evening.
Good evening. I'm Kristen Costa with LA Associates, and we are here this evening to update the board on the status of Whispering Pines. I was actually involved with the initial permitting of the project and have remained involved as a lottery agent since it was permitted in 2004. The owner and builder, Stephen Hinckley, unfortunately is out of town and couldn't attend this evening. With me, though, is Lynn Anderson. Lynn's a retired developer who has extensive comprehensive permit knowledge. And she and I were asked by Mr. Hinckley to assist him with some ideas and ways to revive the project. Also here is Joe Langone, as you mentioned. He's an initial investor in the project. And Carol Hamilton has been kind enough to join us. We kind of pulled her in to give her some of our ideas and such, so she was kind enough to join us. The Board of Selectmen was part of the initial process when the permit was issued, and so we felt it was appropriate to update the board as far as what's going on at Whispering Pines and what we were hoping to do and the changes we were hoping to make. So quickly, over the past, I think, 7 years it's been, since the permit was issued in '04, building began. We had some off-site improvements that were completed, '05, '06. The first units were closed in the building, in the rear building. There were two, it's made up of 2 buildings, in 2007. And since that time, there's been a decline in the sales, up till last year where we had none. So I think we can all agree the economic recession has had a negative impact. As an example, concurrently with the Whispering Pines, Yentiles, another over 55 project in town, was also being permitted. That was an overlay, it wasn't a comprehensive permit, but it was over 55. And that project never really got off the ground. And again, I think we can all agree that had to do with the economic recession. So essentially, we have in the building that's up 24 units, and 3 are left. 3 market units remain unsold. And until we can sell them, we can't start the front building. So as you can see, that's been an issue. And so we've already reduced sale prices. We have, the marketing broker has devised a new marketing plan. And essentially what we need to do now is to actually broaden our market and do it quickly. So the first way to do that would be to relax the age restriction. Right now, currently, when the project was permitted, it was with the restriction that 100% of the units, all of the units, had to at least have 1 person occupy that was of or over the age of 55. The state statute for age-restricted communities requires 80%, okay? So it was further restricted here at the local level. And we're looking to relax that restriction and hopefully broaden the market in that regard. And we're not alone. It's across the state. You know, a lot of over 55 projects are finding the same problems we are and have been doing the same at the state or local level, or both. Many lifting the restriction, not even just relaxing it, some lifting it and removing it completely. So in doing this and considering this option and making the request, we went to the residents. We had 2 meetings. We've conducted 2 meetings with them, one on the 20th last Sunday and then this past Thursday. And Carol was kind enough to attend the second meeting. And we also sent out 2 sets of informational packets to all of the residents, and then made phone calls and emails and whatever for any that didn't attend to try and make sure we reached all of the 20 residents. It's 24 units, 4 on site. So at the meetings, we discussed the options, you know, relaxing the restriction to an 80%, 80-20, lifting it all together, and then, of course, the dangers of doing nothing, which is the state we're in. So we got a lot of good response from the residents, good suggestions about marketing and maintenance, and all of it we've addressed. And then we asked for kind of a vote to see how they all felt about the age restriction. And we did it kind of quietly, you know, a ballot kind of thing, so they didn't feel pressured and uncomfortable in any way. And we were encouraged. We received, of the 20 units that are occupied, we received 16 responses. Of the 16, 13 were in support, so essentially 81%. And 2 even remarked that they would be willing or would be in support of lifting the restriction altogether. We were really offering the 80-20, but they did make that comment. So that was encouraging. At this point, we need, in order to do this, the technique, the mechanism would be to modify the comprehensive permit. And the Board of Appeals is the board that would do that. You, I believe, as a board, should have received a copy of the letter that we submitted to the Board of Appeals. And essentially, we're asking to reduce the restriction from 100% to 80. That allows 9 of the units to be sold to, or I should say occupied by residents under 55. We would still meet the state and federal statute. The program would still meet the parameters of the local initiative program as it was permitted. The request we included asked that they find it to be an insubstantial change, okay? And we expect to hear back within about the next couple of weeks. So where are we at? This is just really the beginning of the process that we hope is going to work. We hope by opening it up, we can get those 3 units sold, get the front started, and hit the spring running. The modification does not require an action from this board. As I said, we felt the need to just more inform than anything else that, you know, what we were hoping to do. If the Board of Appeals finds the request to be insignificant, then we hope that'll be enough. We hope that that'll, you know, give us enough of a broader market to move forward. We actually have buyers ready that are under 55 that would like to live there and can't. They're actually waiting to see if, you know, this change goes through. But the timing is critical. We haven't, like I said, had sales last year at all. It takes 9 months to build that front building and get 1 unit ready to close. So now we're looking at November. And if there's a delay at all, then we're really maybe, you know, there may be none in this year at all. So we're hoping this change is enough, and, you know, otherwise a complete lift would be something, like I said, that we talked about and we considered, but we were, there was more support for the 80%, so that's why we felt it was the right thing to do at this point. And we were looking at other places in the permit itself where we still meet the guidelines, but maybe could, places that we actually exceeded it and could maybe make other changes, but we really don't want to. You know, we're hoping this would be enough. And so essentially that's why we're here. Comments, questions?
Okay, thank you. And thank you for recognizing Carolyn for being here. Any questions or comments from the board?
I'll just make a quick comment. I really don't have an issue with your presenting before the board. I believe this recession has affected everybody in this room and the country as a whole. And I can understand a lot of young folks do want to stay in the town. My attitude's changed over the last 20 years. I've got young kids now, and I know they're not going to be able to afford a house here in the town. So obviously, if we can look at some type of development in an orderly fashion, I have no issue with that. And I know we need to make adjustments. We all need to make adjustments. And I said, I don't have an issue with what you're requesting. And it looks like, I know the town is somewhat a little bit more restrictive at 100%, but you're going to fall in the state guidelines of 80%, which is not a dramatic change. It's a small change, but, you know, I can live with it. Don't have a problem with it. And hopefully we keep some of our young kids living here in the town. And I think that's a goal of, I think, everybody here. I would hope to think that would be the case, and don't have an issue with what you're proposing to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mike, you got it?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that from my perspective, I certainly understand what the economy has done to that particular housing market, to the housing market in general. I suspect, and I'm not particularly surprised by some of the numbers that you recite in terms of the support from the occupant residents, because you know, if it were my investment or the investment of a family of mine, I'd want the project to come through to completion and done so in a way that is consistent, at least architecturally and from a management standpoint, to be consistent with what we started with. I have a question. I want to make sure that Carol or somehow the town is involved in that polling process. Or are we privy to that paperwork? Do we have, you know, how was that done? Was Carol involved with that?
I was involved to the extent that I was at the second meeting where this, excuse me, where this method came up. The residents were delivered a quote-unquote ballot that they were asked to return to the model unit on Sunday of this past week. I have seen the ballot. I've seen the results. They've tallied everything, and all of the paperwork is there and in order.
Okay. Yeah, again, from my perspective, the two important things are making sure that there is significant support from the current occupants. I mean, you know, there's a lot of people who have an interest in this, the town generally, the neighborhood, the occupants, and I just think none as important as the occupants. And then obviously we need to focus on the town and what's best for the town in general. So that's important to me, and then just going through the process that you're going through tonight, making sure that this process is transparent and open to the public, and certainly the Board of Appeals meeting is an appropriate forum for that. I would just encourage anybody who's listening and would ask the press to publicize the fact that Board of Appeals would be your next stop. So those are the two things that are important to me.
I agree with Mike. I think obviously the residents that are living there now, is very important that they're on board, and it seems like by your numbers, a lot of them are. Right?
I have no problem with it. I mean, the site's already developed, the hot top's in, the drainage is in, it's on sewer, foundation's in, other than the frame. As you stated, nothing's changing but actually an age restriction. And, we, given the age restriction, I've shot over, I don't know, since, I think you said 6 or 7 years. So if if they were going to come forward and fill the units, they would have by now. And, the point is, you're a developer, and, the site's already developed, and there's no sense hindering you anymore with a burden of, it's all enterprise as far as making a profit also, and unfortunately, you shouldn't be, after 7 years, condemned to try to move it forward. And I give you credit rather than pack it up like Yental's project. Foundation sitting there, not even backfilled. In your case, you did what you could. And again, I go along with, you did approach the neighbors first, and the neighbors have voted their peace of mind. When you see 16 come back, 13 out of 16, that's pretty good numbers. And if there was really I guess more of a opposition, I guess tonight we'd probably hear the what's it about. So after we get to Mr. Shampoo, we'll see what the public's got to say.
It could take a while, though. Here we go. No, I want to thank you all very much for really for including us in this process. Recognizing we don't have a vote here this evening, but ultimately just sharing this information and keeping us privy to it, keeping the community privy to it. I appreciate you taking the time to come here this evening and do that. I also want to compliment you and your whole team. It seems and it feels to me like this is being conducted properly. And in a way that we all ought to be operating, where you're collaborating, you're negotiating, you're communicating. It seems like the common goal, the common good, is what you're trying to achieve, and you're including the vested parties in that process, and that's it's a testimonial to good communication and collaboration. It seems to me that if the Board of Appeals approves your change, that everyone benefits generally. It seems like the existing residents would benefit by virtue of the fact that the entire property would be more attractive, and ultimately I would imagine that their property values would increase by virtue of not having a big cement edifice in front of them. I think the surrounding neighbors around the area also benefit when the project is complete. We as a community benefit. So really I don't see any negatives associated with approving this small change. So I hope that the Board of Appeals finds in that way. One other thing, if you mentioned, and there was a phrase that you were hoping that the Board of Appeals would find it to be an insubstantial change. Can they find in favor of the change but not use that language? Is there something about that phrase? It came up a couple of times.
That phrase is lifted from the statute that governs modification of comprehensive permits, and I have somewhere in here, if you would like to have an excerpt from it, but essentially a modification that is found to be insubstantial by the Board of Appeals is automatically approved. It just is it's an administrative process. It carries a 20-day clock. From the date that our letter requesting that change was received by the Board of Appeals. If they find that it is not, then we are before them for the public hearing process in a much more formal process. The problem from our point of view with that is that the Board of Appeals meets only once a month, and if that takes a hearing or two, plus an appeal period afterwards, the sad number of 0 for our 2010 sales will be the same number in 2011, which does no one any good.
Thank you. Yeah, I knew there had to be a reason for that phrase to be included in there, and you've explained it very well, and it certainly makes sense to me. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Can we just clarify one thing, Lynn? You indicated that the clock begins when the letter is sent. Doesn't the clock begin when the decision is made at the Board of Appeals?
That's a second clock. The first clock is a 20-day period. Let me take 1 second to make sure
In terms of if the board decides at their next meeting, the next meeting of the Board of Appeals is March 9th, if they decide that it's an insubstantial change, isn't there a 20-day clock at that point if somebody wants to appeal? I believe that's where the clock would be.
Let me read directly. This is an excerpt, and I got it off the web. It was through the DHCD website, so I am assuming that it's accurate. I hope I'm correct. It says, it is 760 CMR 56. It used to be formerly 30, 31, and 35. Changes after issuance of a permit. If after a comprehensive permit is granted by the board, including by order of the committee, blah, 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 an applicant desires to change the details of its project as approved by the board or committee, it shall promptly notify the board in writing describing such change. Within 20 days, the board shall determine and notify the applicant whether it deems the change substantial or insubstantial with reference to the factors set forth at 760 CMR 56.07 parentheses 4.
Right, that's the clock for the Board of Appeals to take an action.
If the change is determined to be insubstantial, or if the board fails to notify the applicant by the end of such 20-day period, the comprehensive permit shall be deemed modified to incorporate the change. Boom.
Well, if the interpretation on that is a little different than how we've understood things in the past. For example, you look to 10 Burlington as an example, where it was determined that there was an insubstantial change, and then parties in interest, the butters, had 20 days in which to appeal, and in fact, they did. What you're reading seems to be a little bit different from that, and different from what my understanding is.
I don't.
Well, that's what you just read. I agree with you.
There's two clocks, Lynn, is that not correct?
If the change is determined to be substantial, the board shall hold a public hearing within 30 days of its determination and issue a
Right.
decision within 40 days of termination of the hearing. All is provided in MGL 40B 21. Only the changes in the project or aspects of the project affected thereby shall be at issue in such hearing. An applicant shall have the right at any time to withdraw, and I believe that has, I think that has appeal rights. This is an excerpt.
Yeah, my point is that you could manipulate it in such a way, and I'm not suggesting you are, because clearly you're not, but somebody could, since the Board of Appeals is only meeting monthly, their next meeting is March 9th, the next meeting after that is April 13th. So you could have, or somebody could have, submitted a letter on March 10th to the Board of Appeals,
Oh, and have it fall through the cracks.
and it could fall through the cracks.
Not our intention at all.
No,
All-
I understand that,
Right.
and I understand that, and that's why I think there should be some clarification, so ultimately, whatever happens, we don't get into a legal skirmish down the road that none of us want to get into, where somebody says their rights of appeal were denied. Now, if you're reading from that excerpt, that's fine, but that doesn't quite jive with the way we've seen things happen in the past.
Again, I think that's because of the two clocks. You're talking about a constructive approval by not taking action if the Board of Appeals doesn't take action to find that is a substantial, significant change, or conversely, an insignificant change, it's constructively approved. So there's, I mean, it makes sense to me, there are two clocks you're talking about. The Board of Appeals has to take some action, or else the applicant's request is constructively approved. Then there's always the appeal period after that, right? And I think, just from the time, I mean, the fact that you're submitting it prior to the Board of Appeals' next regularly scheduled hearing is avoiding one of the problems that we're identifying here. Of course, the other piece of it is just being comfortable that folks know what's going on, that there's some public process.
Well, in terms of informing the residents of the building, we gave them the timeline as we saw it at our meeting on the 20th and the revised timeline in a handout. So they have been notified of this process, clocks, et cetera. The reason that I submitted it is the deadline for the April hearing is March 9th. So if I wait to hear, then I've missed an April hearing. Now it's May plus 9 months to construct. So it's not the speed with and aggressiveness with which we're trying to process while still respecting everybody's need for knowledge and transparency is driven by unfortunate scheduling. If we relax and take 3 months of outreach with the residents followed by a slower process, we just cannot, this project cannot afford to lose another year.
May I ask it this way? Because I agree with I agree that that's the way we understood the process to be, the way Selectman Newhouse just explained it. But in listening to you, that's not what I'm hearing, and I'm listening to you read from the regs.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a very specific question. If on March 9th, you submitted this letter to the Board of Appeals, I guess on February 24th.
Yeah, that's correct.
So that would start a clock, whichever clock. On March 9th, the board makes a decision that it is an insubstantial change. How much more time is there on the appeal clock? We have 9 days in March. We've just used 4 days in February. Does that mean the appeal runs out 7 days from March 9th, which would be March 16th? Or does it run out 20 days from March 9th, which would be March 29th?
I believe that it expires on, depending on whether you count weekends or not, it's somewhere around the 14th, 15th, 16th.
16th, okay.
That's correct.
And that's what I'm hearing first.
That's my understanding of the regulation.
Which is very different than what the town's understanding of this was. So I think that's something, Carol's here, and I think we need to get that clarified, so there's nothing down the road that puts this whole thing into some kind of an uproar. And that's the only reason why I'm mentioning that, because
I honestly don't know the answer. In the sections that I was looking at, there is, as far to the best of my knowledge, there is not an appeal period that starts from the day either that the 20-day clock stops or that a decision, if it's found to be insubstantial. If it's substantial, then it kicks into the whole formal process. But maybe it's in a different section.
it just seems unusual that any appeal period wouldn't begin on the date of a decision.
Right, I didn't take the excerpt that was read to mean that there is not a, I mean, the typical appeal from a Board of Appeals decision being 20 days after it's stamped by the clerk.
Right.
I am presuming that that appeal period applies in this case. I don't know that for a fact, but I would assume that Board of Appeals would consult with counsel and know exactly what those appellate rights are to be able to publicize that.
I think this isn't a question definitely for the
Town council.
the attorneys to address. Wouldn't want to get that wrong, and nor would we want to shortchange anybody's right of appeal. That's doesn't do us any good at all.
You good? Questions or comments from the audience? Mr. Kaiser?
Yes. I wonder,
My friend here. Couple of, I'm probably going to skip. We really are. Try to bear with me. The question of whether it's a substantial change or not is made by the Board of Appeals, is that correct? And the reason for that, I believe, if it's a substantial change, then they have to open hearings all over again, is that correct?
If we want to pursue the change, if they say it's a substantial change, we have two choices. If we want to pursue the change, you are correct. It opens up an entire file, public hearing process. If we decide that we can't go through that process, we just withdraw the request.
Okay. Now let me jump back. Do I understand that the only change you're proposing is an age change?
Yes.
You're not proposing any physical changes to the site?
That's correct. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And I guess the third thing, it's a question and a statement, is why isn't town council involved in this? Because we just had a big discussion here trying to understand the legalities of it. But I would think that they should weigh in to make sure the town is doing the right thing. Is that...
He is involved. In fact, town council's already been contacted by the chairman of the Board of Appeals, which is and he will actually be giving them an advisory as to whether, in his opinion, it is a substantial change or not.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Sagan?
I just had a question on the 20 units that were sold. They were purchased under the current permit, which is age restricted. So their deeds are age restricted? Is that part of it, that is restriction on the deed for the age? Clearly, council needs to get involved with there's 7 people that didn't respond in the positive. We don't know whether they're actively negative or just ambivalent or whatever, but there's 7 people that didn't respond in the positive. So on the potential that they're going to have a concern with a change in the permit, I'm only, that's entirely up to the developer, and I don't really care whether they have to settle that somewhere. I just want to know whether the town would be liable for any perceived losses that they might want to claim, or if they want to appeal and say, well, if I could remove the deed restriction on my unit, which is already purchased, then they could resell their unit easier than if the deed restriction is still on their unit. So that's something that all council has to resolve. The only thing I would be concerned about was whether the town could potentially suffer in that issue. Clearly, if the developer wants to take that chance or take that issue with his attorneys, I don't care. I mean, I don't care for restitution to those 20 people that have purchased. I'm just saying, if this permit is changed, will that put the town at a liability for people who might make a claim against the town, having changed the conditions of their sale?
Right, that's why town council.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I think that question, since it's been asked, I referred to council, but I can't say this, that every record title to any development that has any kind of permitting makes a reference to that permitting scheme, and in this case, it happens to be the comprehensive permit statutory scheme, which inherent in that is the legal redress to make changes to the permit. So I think that the town's obligation is to make sure that we follow the parameters prescribed by the law. And, you know, certainly I think that council ought to weigh in on that, along with a number of other issues that they'll address with the Board of Appeals, I'm sure.
Mr. Chairman, just a small point of clarification. of the 7 units that you mentioned, 4 are unsold. Only 3 residents responded stating that they preferred that age restriction remain.
I thought 20 units were sold.
Yeah.
16 responded. 3 of the 16 were in the negative.
Right. And
4 didn't respond. We don't know whether they're negative or ambivalent. I just said that there's 7 that didn't respond in the positive. It doesn't mean that they're...
I believe only one failed to respond at all.
You said there were 16 out of the
Yeah.
20, so...
Let me review. Three unit owners who attended 1 or more meetings didn't respond with an opinion. 6 didn't attend meetings, but all but 1 responded either by email or letter. So 3 didn't respond. 2 favored lifting the age restriction totally. 11 supported an 80-20. And 3 didn't want any change. 3 didn't respond.
6, I said 7, but...
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's fine.
Right.
The town is not liable, I don't really care. Then that's the decision the developer makes. It's a chance he's willing to take or whatever. But as long as the town is not made liable for changing the permit after people have already bought. Changing a permit before anybody buys anything is very different than changing a permit after some of the people have bought with certain conditions, and then the other people buying are going to have different conditions. That, I mean, you know, if I bought my house and then somebody decides to change the conditions that are already in my title, I would be concerned and bring it to my attorney.
If I may, it's a question I have, and I don't know who to address it to, so I'll just lob it out there, and the smart people can answer. Are the age restrictions on specific units within the development? In other words, if someone purchased in, Building A, under the restrictions, effectively all of the units in Building A, in my brain, all of the units that currently exist with the age restriction, and the new units that would be built, some portion of those units would end up being unrestricted. Is that not accurate, or am I smoking something here?
Essentially, the 4 that are unsold, if this were to pass, the 4 that are unsold right now could theoretically be bought by that 20%.
Okay.
And there's 4 of them. So, and 9 is what 20% is of the 48. It allows for 9 units. So that could be 4 and 5 in the front, 5 in the front. But it's not particular units.
Thank you. That's the word.
Yeah. The math is done, so we can market to, right now, we would be able to market to 9 people. Once they start purchasing, then, we have to be cognizant of that.
Of the overall
percentage,
complexion of...
yes.
I see. Thank you very much.
Any other questions, Carol?
Follow up on Mr. Shampoo's question. The units that are currently sold in the building, the 20 units that are currently sold, each deed has a restriction as to age in that deed. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe it references the comprehensive permit and those conditions in the permit that apply, and that is one of them. Yes, the age restriction.
The master deed refers to the
Also, I was gonna say
comprehensive
that the
permit.
condo dogs do too.
But it's subject to the comp permit, so a modification of the comp permit theory would carry through to the master deed. But we need to be very careful that, to your point, and to the existing owners, that the appropriate title changes, if we're able to achieve what we're trying to do, are meticulously taken care of.
To Mr. Sagel's point, though, just to be clear, if somebody is living there right now, of the 20 folks who are currently living, occupying homes, they will remain deed restricted. Is that correct? I mean, if they say to you, gee, I don't want to be deed restricted anymore because, as Mr. Sagel is indicating, I think there's a disparity in value. I have I'm deed restricted, but the next guy who comes in here won't be, so he will have a wider universe in which to resell his property. So if somebody who is now deed restricted and lives there comes to you and says, why don't you let me remove my deed? I suspect you're not going to want to do that because that defeats your purpose of trying to sell to new folks.
I believe it would apply when they go to resell. If there is still the
What would apply
available,
when they go to resell?
if those people you're referring to that are currently 100% age restricted, for instance, those units, I should say,
Right.
when those people, or if and when they try to resell their unit, if the balance of over 55 versus not still allows for more in the 20%, I'm not saying this right, then they could mark it to the 20%. Basically, a calculation would need to be done. The association would respond and explain that we only have 19% or 18% that's not age restricted current residents. So you can market,
You can
open your market up.
You're
Yeah.
saying they could open their market up if there is a unit available?
Unrestricted.
Count,
Yes.
an unrestricted.
Your annual reporting requirements in order to qualify for the tag of an adult community, and it's complicated. At the federal level, of the age is 62. In another program, it's 55, and the recording requirements are handled by the association, and you have to count, and it's a bit of a moving target. And since we've never reduced a 100% restriction down to 80, I don't know the legal mechanism for making that fair, but there is one.
It sounds to me like the age or the deed restrictions is a rolling restriction based on what the complexion or the makeup of the population of the entire community is at the time the individual wants to
Exactly.
sell their property.
Exactly.
That's the way I would interpret it.
That's how I understand it.
That's for a program that we're trying to,
We're not inventing this program.
No.
This is what's allowed by statute
Okay.
now.
but the reason we don't know a specific mechanism for that is because if this doesn't fly, we don't want to be spending hours and times and dollars dotting the i's and crossing the t's before we even know that we've got an alphabet.
So if say, both buildings are built, they're up, they're all sold out, I want to sell my unit, and I bought it under the regulations of over 55, I can't sell it unless it's over 55. That restriction would remain on that deed.
No.
See, I believe that if the total unit composition in your building or in the development at the time that you want to sold met an 80% threshold as defined in this, then you could.
Okay, so you're saying some of the 20 were sold as an over 55? Okay, right.
Maybe to a solution, that's something to think about. I'm not saying just an idea that I just said to man to my right, that from what I'm hearing everybody's argument, to save legal and, theories that are starting to correspond. What would happen if we finished the first building, the 4 units that are not sold, and then put no restrictions on the second building? Would that work for you?
That question has come up, and it could. However, Carol, help me here. We felt that there was an inherent inequity. Now, there may not always be, because if you believe the demographic experts, the over 55 market is going to rebound at some point and become as robust as it was when we originally permitted this project. But until that happens, there would then be an inherent inequity in the value of the properties between age-restricted units and market units. And the market is fluctuating. So it seems a little bit unfair to divide it by building. That's one thought.
But unfortunately, I mean, if we hear what we're hearing tonight, the problem is, just as everybody has been stating, if you bought this unit, say, 6 years ago, and you bought it as an over 55, now all of a sudden, the regulation has changed. What is the current value, or what did the value take a loss at? So in other words, if this one over here has no restrictions, and you're a young family, you're gonna look at this one more than you are. That's why I was basically saying, can we separate the two units? Because you're not gonna look at the other unit with an over 55 partially restrictions. That other bill would have partial.
It's an interesting concept. Because we have of our existing owners, such a high percentage of existing unit owners that want that restriction lifted, and they know that out of the 24 units in the building, that means 4. We didn't try and separate the buildings. We discussed it, and it's come up at both resident meetings.
Plus, this change is what we're hoping will, if it were to go through, is going to help us sell the 4 that remain unsold to begin with. So if we don't, if we put it to the front building, that doesn't help us now anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I was just sitting here, and to be honest with you, I was just laying back, but unfortunately, I'm just trying to solve the problem now, you know?
Right, no, we appreciate any thoughts that we haven't already had.
You know, I didn't want to say too much to the fire.
Any other questions or comments for anybody in the back? Go ahead, Paul, Mr. Agostino.
Hi, Robert Howe, who's a resident there, asked me to deliver a letter to the selectmen. Who do I give it to? You?
Yeah.
Okay, he's also given me a second paper of his problems with management. As I understand, there are no other management. Here's a list of his complaints regarding, he would be here this evening. If you read the end of that letter, the complaint letter, it will explain to you why he's not here.
Okay, we'll take a look at this in a, excuse me. Mr. Lingenfeld, did you have something?
I just wanted to throw up a concern about the precedents that might be set on this action. Just that at least someone threw that word out there. It might affect other permits conceivably. I just wanted to throw that out there too.
Did you want? Mr. Kaiser?
I don't know where to start. The original building permit was based on, it was a comprehensive permit based on 40B regulations. Everywhere you look in those regulations, I've read them 17 times, talks about perpetuity. Everywhere. The deeds, everything is in perpetuity. The owner that owns the property has to pass that perpetuity on to the next owner if he sells it. So all of a sudden, I think you guys are not recognizing perpetuity. I don't know what else I can say.
Yeah, what Mr. Kaiser is referring to, though, is a little bit apples and oranges. The in perpetuity refers to affordability. The number of units that are designated as affordable units must remain so in perpetuity. I don't know that this comprehensive permit or any other refers to an age restriction in perpetuity. We're certainly going to be looking at some of the questions that have come up tonight to try to have answers, because I'm sure the Board of Appeals is going to have many similar questions. But as far as perpetuity is concerned, it has to do with affordability.
It has to do with the permit, does it not?
The permit, well,
the permit.
The comprehensive permit is to provide affordable housing.
Right.
In this particular hybrid of the comprehensive permit, it also age restricts for a particular population. But for the most part, 40B is restricting affordability on a certain number of units forever. And that's where your perpetuity comes from. This over 55 is a different animal. It's not quite the same as what you're used to in normal 40B comprehensive permits.
I defer to town council. I think there's several issues here that are going to bite somebody.
Well, town council is involved, and he's working with the Board of Appeals. And they're the ones that are going to be making the final decision on that anyway.
The reason, excuse me, but the reason they would, the reason that we're talking about whether it's a substantial change or not, the basis of that is based on the fact that a substantial change has to go back before the state, and it has to go through the hearings of a Board of Appeals.
Correct.
Not just one meeting where they're going to say, yeah, we're going to approve this.
Correct.
They have to open it. If it's a substantial change, they have to reopen the hearings.
Correct.
I'm not sure it has to go back to the state. I think you're right to some extent, Mr. Kiesinger. If they decide that there is a substantial change, for whatever reason, they make that becomes a decision of the Board of Appeals, then if the applicant still wants to go forward, it would then be scheduled via a public hearing where there would be notifications to abutters and there would be the new timeline and everything.
Just to clarify, the state requirement for the over 55 project, this particular comprehensive permit, did not restrict, it follows the 80-20 federal and state statute. They were not party to that 100% restriction, if you will. It was at the local level that it was increased from 80 to 100. I just want to make sure that the state doesn't restrict.
Talking about in the list.
And I am too. I am as well. The eligibility letter that allowed for us to permit this project only required that we meet the state and federal statute of a minimum of 80% residents be at least 55 or older. They did not put on the further restriction to 100. That was done here locally. Okay, so as far as the state was concerned, we needed to simply meet the federal statute. I just want to make sure that was clear.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, please. I'm a resident of Whispering Pines. It's a beautiful development. We all love it there. My question is to Kristen. I know we talked, but to clarify this, will the 40Bs go back to change, or are those in the next building going to go on to be 55 and older 40Bs?
I should have mentioned, the affordable units will all remain at 100% over 55. This 80-20 does not apply to the affordable units at all. I should have mentioned that. Thank you, Denise.
And also, I wrote a letter to the board, and I just want to know that you're in receipt of it. Denise McHugh.
It was not in our packets.
I didn't. I don't know if the Board of Selectmen received it.
Oh, I'm sorry, to the Board of Appeals. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Then I would direct my statement then to you that we all bought it 55 years older. We love, and that's why we came to Whispering Pines, because we wanted to be in there, not because we don't love children, but because we meld with people our age. And I feel that many of the people, as well as myself, who had just come back from vacation and missed the first meeting, were a lot overwhelmed by a one-day notice of a meeting the next day and the following week notice of a one-day notice for the next week. I had just come back from vacation. I got notes that there was a meeting, and I'm a little bit disturbed about the changes, as well as the people who are in the 70s and 80s were very upset. Some that could not come tonight because it bothered them so much. So I just wanted to represent those people. Okay. That this is a change, a big change in our lives. And we do love children, but if you lower the age, we would like that age restriction to be no more than 50, because we don't want children around us to be running down the hallways or whatever. that's just a simple request.
Okay, thank you. I just feel obligated now to read this. I'm a tenant over there. Robert Howe has a list of issues that he has with the facility itself, I guess the management company that's doing it. I'm not going to read all these. I don't really think a lot of it really pertains to tonight, but I'm going to read the final paragraph, which I was asked to do. Talking to Mr. Hinckley of Silva Associates about the problems has brought no results. Sorry I could not make it tonight, as sidewalks for the handicap areas were not plowed. I am against any changes at this time. Excuse me, Robert A. Howe, Unit 2208, Whispering Pines. That's just to get that on record, because he did state that he's against any changes. Any other questions or comments from the audience? The board? Bill, do we need to take any action on this tonight?
It's up to the board if they want to take any action. There is no requirement to take a vote, but it did come before the board through the LIP process back in 2003, and that's why it's here again, frankly, at the town's request. The developer came because the town requested them to come.
Maybe it's already a foregone conclusion, but I would hope that the communications and the minutes from this evening's meeting would make it to the Board of Appeals for them. I just want to make sure that any of the questions, and I think there's a lot of valid conversation that came up, Mr. Sagel's question and many other questions that came up. I want to make sure those questions are asked again of the Board of Appeals for them to deliberate over, as well as articulated to town council for council to offer advice on. I don't want to lose any of the value of the conversation that was had here tonight and have to sort of reinvent the wheel. So I'm not sure what mechanism is in place for that to occur. I assume it probably happens as a matter of practice, but I'd like to ask, I guess, specifically that something to that effect do take place.
Well, perhaps you might want to require, or request, since you probably can't require, but request that the applicant notify in writing every resident of the complex and all of those who would otherwise have been notified, who would be abutters if this were going through a regular process, and copy that letter to the Board of Selectmen. And notify them of the March 9th meeting. And then the board is assured that everybody is notified, and that if people want to make a comment, they can do so at that time.
I have a question. We drafted Carol, and she's been extremely helpful in terms of being the liaison for the town, because this is sort of a hybrid-y kind of situation. Can we make that official so that we are supplying her with, say, the actual copies of the applicant's replies, and are, the sort of gatekeeper for this process as we move forward?
I mean, I think, if I may, I think you can certainly, provide her or the Board of Selectmen with, whatever you wish to provide them, but I'm not sure that addresses the question of ensuring that people have an opportunity to...
No, two separate issues.
Okay.
No, absolutely. We will.
Yeah.
But I was hoping that we could have a single point person at the town level, in addition, and we will do the distribution and notification of timeline and hearing process as well. But then she would be the person who we would say, this is what we did, and she'd have the file. But, or do you want us to just copy all different departments?
Oh, I don't think it's necessary. I think you can provide the information to Carol.
Okay.
Yeah. Mr. Sagal?
As a former Board of Appeals member, if they're in some way obligated or presumed to make a decision in one night, a number of the questions that were asked tonight were not answered. They were just asked, and several of them needed to go to council. So unless council is there at that meeting, requested to be at that meeting, then the people on that board will not have the benefit of the answers to any of the questions that were asked tonight, even if they're asked again that night, because they will, again, need to be addressed to council. So in support of Mr. Shampoo's idea, at least if a copy of the minutes were sent to council, then they can include that in their advisory to that board, and they would have time to react to it. Even if they're sitting there, most council will probably say, I need to get back to you on this one, because they have to look up a lot of this. Some of it's pretty fine detailed stuff that might even be contradictory within the permit process, which is also in existence. So I think to get a functional advisory to that board for something that's going to happen in 9 days, I would support Mr. Shampoo's idea that maybe some of these questions need to go to council in time for the council to be able to give them that advice.
We can provide the information. Obviously, minutes can't be provided because they wouldn't have been approved, but we can certainly work with Beverly and Carol and I, and we can put together the information, the questions that are coming out of here, and send them both to Mr. Boyle of the Board of Appeals and to council. In fairness to council, he's just being notified too. The date of this letter is February 24th, which was Thursday. So council is also just finding out about this, and but we will endeavor to give him all of that information.
Mr. Augustino?
All I've heard, sir, is the terms butters, neighbors. I'm a neighbor. Does that mean that at some point we're going to be notified about these hearings? Because if not, our lives are have been severely affected by Whispering Pines. And if you're going to run this through without having input from the neighborhood, I don't see the justice in it, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think we're trying to run, I don't think trying to run anything through. And I believe what you're talking about is going through a regular process, like you send the letters to the abutters, notification of a hearing.
Yes.
And I'm not even sure, it's the Board of Appeals meeting.
Right, I mean, they're not legally bound to do this. We're just making a request that they do it, but in fact, you're being notified right now that the meeting at the Board of Appeals is March 9th. And if there is a legal requirement to notify anybody, then the town will take steps to do that. At this point, there is no determination that there's a legal requirement, so we're taking the next best step, which is to request, in the spirit of cooperation, that people get notified. And that notification, at this point, would go to the residents of the area, of the complex, and anybody who would normally be notified if this were a formal process. And I believe that Kristen has indicated that they would do that.
Does that mean I can expect to get a letter?
Yes.
I live 1 street over.
Yes, well, you were notified for the initial Board of Appeals, right, when this was permitted?
2003.
Okay,
No.
that would be the process. It would be the same list, if you will.
Haven't received any notice.
Well, it was back in '03, '04.
04?
The initial permitting.
Yes, we were.
Okay, then you would be, yeah. That's what I was, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Very good. Motions or?
Thank you very much for the agenda time and your input and your questions.
Thank you very much. Okay, it's running a little late here, but our 7:30 is discussion relative to the board's intention to lay out the ways described in the proposed warrant article, Leonard Lane and Mill Road Extension.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to provide you and the members with a copy of a memorandum that I received from Anthony Pronsky, the engineering director, regarding this particular matter. the engineering division visited these particular subdivisions, specifically Mill Road for the Kiley Estates subdivision and Leonard Lane for the Leonard Estates subdivision, and this is a process that we have to go through in order to eventually approve the layout of the ways that will be described in warrant article, I believe number 20 is the warrant article, number 20. The subdivisions were determined, have been inspected by the Department of Public Works during construction, and as of today's date, these subdivisions have been completed to the satisfaction of the engineering division. Mylar, as-built, and street acceptance plans for Leonard Lane and Mill Road Extension have been delivered to the engineering division. Mill Road Extension is within the Kiley Estates subdivision, which was approved by the Wilmington Planning Board under subdivision control in October of 2002. It's a continuation of Mill Road, which is located off of Chestnut Street, and all subdivision easements have been conveyed to the town of Wilmington through the planning board. Leonard Estates, Leonard Lane, which is a part of Leonard Estates subdivision, was approved by the planning board under subdivision control in February of 2005. Leonard Lane is located off of Hopkins Street, and again, all subdivision easements have been conveyed to the town of Wilmington through the planning board. It is recommended by Mr. Pronsky and myself that the selectmen proceed with the acceptance of Mill Road Extension and Leonard Lane as public ways at the next annual town meeting in April of 2011. And so this just defines some of that process at this point. Do you have the motion?
You need a question, comments, or motion on that?
A brief question, just procedurally. Is this being precipitated, up until this point, these streets weren't recognized as public ways by the town because they weren't yet fully developed or built out, and now that they've achieved some amount of development, they now rise to the level of being recognized? Is that the process? Is that how?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure how this all works.
Questions or comments, or motion down here?
I would move to accept the recommendation of Mr. Pronsky and the town manager, and accept Mill Road and Leonard Lane as, what's the terminology?
I would say to accept the recommendation of the engineering director and myself to move forward with the intention to lay out the ways described in the warrant article.
Well said.
I'll second it.
Motion made second. All in favor? Unanimous? Okay, 7:35, Board of Selectmen discussion. We're going to discuss the proposed non-petition articles for the annual town meeting. Warrant.
Mr. Chairman, you have a draft of those articles, and these are specifically, as you've indicated, the non-petitioned articles. The board will be asked to close the warrant at its next meeting, and certainly if the board wishes to instruct me to add additional articles, we'll certainly be happy to do so. This incorporates articles that would be emanating from the budget and also from other direction that I've received from the board over this past year. Article 1, as you know, is always the election meeting, which this year the election is on Saturday, the 23rd of April, and the offices that would be elected are 2 selectmen for the term of 3 years, 2 members of the school committee for the term of 3 years, 1 member of the housing authority for the term of 5 years, and 1 member of the redevelopment authority for the term of 5 years. Article 2, standard article to hear reports of committees and act thereon. We don't have any committees reporting back from the prior town meeting. That's what would normally happen. So we would not take this article up to a vote except to pass over. Article 3 would have the town pay for any unpaid bills of previous years. There are no unpaid bills of previous years, so this too would be passed over. Article 4, authorize the treasurer collector to enter into agreements with banks in the Commonwealth in order to permit the town to maintain funds on deposit and also to provide banking services. Again, a standard article. Article 5 is the budget article, which the Finance Committee has been going through the budget. You, of course, heard the budget presentation back on January 31st. And over the last several weeks, the Finance Committee has been meeting to review the budget. They still have additional meetings. They have a meeting tomorrow night to review the education budget, specifically the school department in Wilmington, as well as the Shawshing Tech budget. Article 6 begins the capital items that are going before the board this year. Article 6 would include the purchase of equipment and vehicles. In this case, the police department will be looking to purchase 5 replacement police cruisers at a total cost of $150,000. The fire department would be looking to purchase the rapid response vehicle at a total cost of $220,000. And these items have all been discussed. If the board wants me to elaborate on them again, please just stop me. Otherwise, I'm just going to go through this. Article 6, the third portion of Article 6, is $42,000 for the purchase of 2 cargo vans for the Public Buildings Department. This article also calls for the purchase of replacement vehicles for the Department of Public Works, including the replacement of a 3/4-ton pickup truck with cap and plow, which we estimate to be $33,600. The replacement of the skid steer loader, which we estimate to be $46,350, and the replacement of a heavy-duty catch basin cleaner truck, which we estimate to cost $160,000. All of these vehicles would be assigned within the Highway Division. The Department of Elderly Services seeks to replace their wheelchair-accessible transport van at a cost of $60,525, and the school department is seeking to replace their wheelchair-accessible minivan at a cost of $47,000. Article 7 would appropriate available funds in the fiscal year 12 budget for 3 different roof repair projects. One would be $46,000 to replace approximately 2,545 square feet of roof area at the Wildwood Early Childhood Center, 5,200 square feet of roof area at the Public Buildings Department headquarters would cost approximately $115,000, and we would appropriate $175,000 to replace almost 10,000 square feet of roof area at the Public Works Department headquarters. Article 8 would enable the town to purchase and install an upgraded fire alarm system at the North Intermediate School and at the Woburn Street School. Total cost $310,000. This is consistent with the town's program to upgrade the fire alarm systems at the various school buildings. You will recall that we recently finished projects of this nature at the Wildwood Early Childhood Center as well as the Shawshing School. Article 9 would be to purchase and install a high-force hot air furnace at the Boutwell Early Childhood Center. The furnace is the original, and we estimate that this cost would be $85,000. Article 10 would be to replace windows and doors at the Wilmington Memorial Library. We estimate the cost to be $75,000. Article 11 would allow the town to make improvements to various school and recreation play areas, which would include the replacement of fencing at the Woburn Street School tennis courts, the replacement of fencing and the resurfacing of the tennis and basketball courts located across from the Boutwell School, and the repair of play structures and other maintenance improvements to the Justin A. O'Neill Memorial Skate Park, which is located on the grounds of the Shawshene School. In total, we estimate the cost to be $94,700. This would be handled through the Department of Public Works. Article 12 would continue the miscellaneous facilities improvement funding that would allow us to undertake various improvements and repairs to municipal and school facilities, including but not limited to addressing energy efficiencies, plant operations, mechanical systems, structural issues, code compliance, other items that come up during the year, and it would also enable us to have funding available to leverage those dollars against potential grant awards. We would fund this at the same level as last year, which was $125,000.
Mr. Carr, can I ask you to pause just a moment? Sure. Sorry, I thought of it on Article 10 and it slipped my mind. I'm going to ask you to go back just a couple of bullets. $75,000 for library windows and doors, I think is what it amounted to.
Right.
You mentioned the word grants, and that's what reminded me I wanted to ask you. Do we pursue or go after any, if I replace windows in my home and I make sure I use energy efficient, I get rebates on taxes and other things like that. Are there programs like that we leverage when we go and purchase windows and doors for older buildings like the library?
When they're made available to us, I'm not aware of any specific one in this particular case. We've done that with the lighting that you've seen around town and in the various school buildings. We're also doing that with through the Green Repair Program through the MSBA for Shawshene, for the Shawshene window and door project. That's specific to school facilities, though, and I'm not aware of one for the libraries. But certainly, if it became available, we'd do that.
That's fair. I just, as a matter of course, if such things are available out there, we certainly do take advantage of them.
We do, and we have.
Thank you.
Article 13 is again, the routine article that we have in every year that enables us to transfer into various line items of the current budget, in this case, the fiscal year 2011 budget, from other available funds in order to meet any deficit situations we have. Obviously, there is going to be a need to look at how we take care of our problem with snow and ice.
No.
Yeah, that continues to add up. That, and there are some overtime issues really resulting from some of that in the public safety areas, particularly with fire, that may also need attention, but I don't anticipate a problem. I believe there'll be sufficient surplus funds available to meet any particular deficit in any line item account for 2011. Article 14 will seek to continue the town senior citizen tax work-off program. We would be funding this at $15,360, similar to the past years. Again, similar to past years, Article 15 would appropriate $6,000 to assist in the observance of Memorial Day and Veterans Day. And Article 16 would appropriate $1,500, $750 each, under the authority of Section 9, Chapter 40 of the General Laws, to make available those funds for the two active veterans organizations, the VFW and the American Legion. Article 17 would allow us to reauthorize revolving accounts pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 53E and a half. These specific revolving accounts, the compost bin revolving account and the Title V septic loan program account. Article 18 allows us to raise money for the MTBE products liability litigation settlements and enables us to transfer those funds into the water fund as we've done in the past. It's pretty much dried up at this point. There is about $3,900 that we've received that we need to take a formal action on that. As you know, we ended up with well over $900,000 in total. The board had asked that we prepare an article to take to town meeting relative to the imposition of a local meals tax, and that's what Article 19 does. I've reported to the board on this issue on 2 other occasions with fairly significant reports. The last was in October. Just by way of update of information, I think the last time we spoke, there were, and this was back in October of 2010, there were 116 communities that had adopted the local option meals excise. That number right now, or at least as of the end of the year, rose to 124 cities and towns that have approved since 2009, when the enabling legislation was passed, the imposition of a meals excise. The Department of Revenue reports that through December of 2010, cities and towns with a meals tax in place had raised a total of more than $37.5 million. And one other community that we had been reporting on, Winchester, has since adopted the meals tax. Article 20 would be the formal vote at town meeting to accept as public ways Leonard Lane and Mill Road Extension, which we just had discussion about. Article 21 is a request of the town clerk asking to accept provisions of the general law, which reads as any public office in any city or town may remain closed on any or all Saturdays as may be determined from time to time, subject to the provisions of the charter or by a vote of the town at a special or regular town meeting, and the provisions of Section 9 of Chapter 4 shall apply in the case of such closing of any such office on any Saturday, to the same extent as if such Saturday were a legal holiday. This really means that if the occasion arises where the final day to register to vote, for example, it turns out to be a Saturday because of the calendar, that final day could be the Friday instead of the Saturday. It's pretty perfunctory. We determined that it was never something that was adopted in the town. It probably is something that has been held in practice, frankly, and this would codify it. Articles 22, 23, and 24 are all based upon the request of the police chief, and he has been working with town council, who I've provided you with his most recent draft of these 3 articles addressing 3 issues, 2 of which are related, one of which is not. The one that's not related is to establish a new Section 52 of the inhabitant bylaws to establish a curfew at public parks and playgrounds. This would assist the police department in having the wherewithal to have a law to back them up in terms of moving folks who are essentially loitering at public parks and playgrounds or cemetery or wherever well into the evening hour. And I've provided a copy of that draft to you. Articles 23 and 24. 23 also addresses the inhabitant bylaws under Chapter 5, Section 23, relative to the regulation of dealers in junk, old metals, or secondhand articles. And again, we have a rather old bylaw, I guess, maybe a little archaic, and this better addresses the problems and the ability to regulate those dealers in this kind of material. And Article 24 is similar, except that it regulates pawnbrokers. And so in each case, the town has articles that has bylaws that address these matters, but the police chief wanted to strengthen those bylaws and has done so in conjunction with the assistance of town council. I know that, and we've talked about this, I've talked about this with the chairman, that there may be a meeting going forward where the board wants to have greater discussion about some of these articles, and in that case we could bring in the appropriate folks. In this instance, it would be the police chief to talk about that, and you can certainly let me know if you'd like to do that. The next article is Article 25, and you don't have it because we just concluded the need for this article with the decision that was made today. And this has to do with the Maple Meadow landfill. You will recall that we had an article back in 2009 asking to petition the general court to seek enactment of special legislation for the town that would exempt the town of Wilmington from any liability with the Maple Meadow landfill. That passed. That went forward to the legislature. That was moving at a pretty good clip last year in 2010, but ended up dying before final action was taken. We've consulted with town council as well as with officials from the state senate, with Senator Tarr and his office, and they have concluded that the particular action taken is now stale, such that it would have to be readopted and brought forward again. So the article that we have before you is the same article that was adopted back in 2009 and is consistent with what town council recommends that we move forward on. So those are at this point, the 25 non-petition articles, Mr. Chairman, members of the Board of Selectmen, that we anticipate going forward with, and certainly if I've left any out that the board is interested in, or if there's any direction the board wants to give to me on any of these, please let me know. And our intention is to have a final warrant prepared for your review for the next meeting.
Questions or comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I know we're discussing the non-petition articles, but a number of petition articles that were submitted speak to changes to our charter. And depending on town council's opinion as to whether or not they're in a form that would pass muster and can go through the process, I'm really not sure what town council is going to say about a couple of them, but one of them I thought really made sense, and in the event that council has any objections as to the form, I'd ask the board to consider inserting it as a non-petition article, and that is the one that would eliminate the residency requirement for the town manager. We'll, in all likelihood, be looking at that in 2012, and I just think it makes perfect sense to have our options open. So I just wanted to request that of the board, see if anybody had any objections, and find out town council's opinion in due course, but at least let's have that one ready if he does have any concerns about the non-petition article.
Okay.
May I ask Mr. Newhouse? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to ask Mr. Newhouse what the rationale is for elevating it, if that's the right term to use, to a non-petition status. In other words, why is there an advantage to having that be a selectman-sponsored article as opposed to?
No, just if, and I guess I'll be a little bit more specific. The town charter, in Wilmington at least, was adopted by special legislation. So whenever there is a change to the town charter, it involves the legislative process. And depending on town council's opinion as to whether or not changes to the proposed non-petition articles can be offered on the floor, which would specifically contemplate that legislative process, I'm not sure what his opinion is going to be, whether or not those changes can be made. And frankly, since that particular article came in, and I think it makes sense, because I think that article makes sense for us, it's particularly relevant in the next couple of years, we might as well take this opportunity to make sure that it is included in the warrant one way or another.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Do I take that as a direction that if town council believes the petition warrant article as presented is not in its proper form, such that it could not be adopted or go forward, that I would ask him to construct an article that would ensure that it meets the...
That's what I'm asking for,
Okay.
yes, that we could include it in the warrant before we close the warrant.
Okay, thank you.
Do we need to act to support that course of action? In other words, we need to vote, or is this just, I mean, I agree with you, and
I think we should...
We'll close, yeah, I mean...
I'd like to get a vote, if that's what you wanted me to do. That's what you've
I'd
done on other...
make a motion to that effect, then.
We have a motion
It's seconded.
and seconded. All in favor? It's unanimous? Any other questions or comments on the non-petition articles?
I certainly don't, I'm real sensitive about wasting the chief of police's time, but Mr. Carey, you brought up the notion that perhaps he would be willing to share maybe his impetus or his motivations behind the I think it's 22, 3, and 4 articles. You know, I had a couple of questions that came up as I was reading through the articles, specifically what was the impetus, what was the motivation for even including them. You know, if he wants to either write up a statement as to what specifically has, why now, why these, is there a cause for concern, or is it just a matter of regular housekeeping to keep the regs sharp and updated, or if he's so willing, and you know, again, I don't want to take up his valuable time, but I'd be interested to hear his positions on these.
I think he would be happy to come in. I think he feels strongly about them. It's probably a little bit of both in terms of the relevancy, as well as he could probably speak to why he thinks there's a need. But no, I think he feels strongly enough about these that he would want to come in and at least begin the dialogue. Certainly there'll be some discussion of this at the March 15th public hearing, but you know, the more the better, if that's what the board is interested in.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be inclined to ask him to do so, if it makes sense for him to find the time to do it.
Any other questions or comments on the non-petition articles? Thank you. Communications.
Yes. You have a copy of a letter that was sent to the superintendent of schools, Joanne Benton, about the designer selection process for the Wilmington High School project. This was sent by the MSBA's chief engineer, Joseph Buckley, indicating that the School Building Authority Designer Selection Panel on Tuesday, February 15th, reviewed and considered 6 applicants for the above referenced project, the Wilmington High School project. The following individuals represented the Wilmington Public Schools on that panel: Joanne Benton, the superintendent, myself as town manager, and Paul Ruggiero, the director of administration and finance for the school department. In accordance with the provisions of law, the designer selection panel voted unanimously to rank the finalists in order of qualifications, that being number 1, Dorr and Whittier Architects, number 2, Sims, Maney and McKee Associates, and number 3, Flansburgh Associates. The panel determined that Dorr and Whittier Architects possesses the requisite skills and experience for the project, particularly in light of their extensive experience in the design and construction of schools in Wilmington. The town of Wilmington now needs to take the appropriate local steps necessary to award the contract for designer services to the first-ranked firm and authorize fee and contract negotiations. And it goes on to talk about the specifics of that process. In a nutshell, we did meet on February 15th. There were 15 members of the committee, 12 represent the state. There were 11 of those 12 there, I believe, and the 3 of us. Actually, there were 10 of the 12 there and the 3 of us, so there were 13 people. And the town was unanimous in its position that Dorr and Whittier be selected as the number 1 firm. I'm pleased that a fairly significant majority of the DSP agreed with us. In fact, every single member of the panel had Dorr and Whittier either as a first, second, or third choice. And as a result of that, we're going forward with Dorr and Whittier in the process of negotiating a contract and a fee arrangement. There will be a formal vote taken by the high school building committee at its next meeting, which, as you all know, is Wednesday, March 2nd at 6:30 at the high school library. And the board has some information from its favorite communicators. Xfinity and Comcast is just indicating that they're adjusting some of their prices in the community, and they have to notify us of that. They have to notify the Board of Selectmen of that, and then obviously they are notifying all of their customers. And that same thing, Verizon Fios TV is also informing us of a rate change, again, as they say, due to rising cost for their Fios TV Premier services, and all affected customers there would be receiving a notice by March 2nd. That concludes the regular business before the board, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any public comments?
George Lincoln, Public Comment Street. In regards to Mr. Nelson's comment, that petition article actually was mine. I just had a question. I don't know if the board can answer it. This rather involved process to change the town charter, and I know part of that process involves collection of some signatures on petitions, as part of the process. By the selectmen bringing that article or a similar article forward, does that change or alter that process? Does anyone know that?
I don't believe so.
So someone would still have to coordinate the collection of petitions, whether it was sponsored by the selectmen or...
Oh, I think I misunderstood your question then. I misunderstood your question. Could you ask it again?
Maybe not the appropriate arena. Maybe you should just ask Susan George. I understand that it's kind of an involved process to change the charter, even though there was a very small change in the actual language that I was proposing. And versus my bringing it forward as the petitioner versus the selectmen bringing it forward, does it change the process? I understand that to change the charter, there's a rather onerous petition process is down the road if it passes this first test. Does the selectmen bringing it forward alter that process, is my question.
Well, the non-petition articles that are brought and included in the warrant, the selectmen vote to close the warrant and include whatever petition articles are brought forward by the town and various departments within the town, and there's no signature requirement for that. Under state law, the selectmen are also required to include in the warrant any petition article which has received the requisite number of signatures.
That wasn't the question.
Okay, then try me again, because I'm just not getting it.
After this town meeting,
yes,
there's a process to alter, a subsequent process. Versus my bringing it forward or the selectmen, does that subsequent process become altered?
Now I understand the question. Not if the article brought by the petitioner makes it to the floor of town meeting and paves the way for that subsequent process. Let me be specific in your case. That petition article that you are bringing forward, in my mind, I'm just not sure on whether or not town council would say that it is okay for the moderator to accept a motion on the floor of town meeting, which would specify that it's to be submitted to the legislature for adoption as special act legislation and then returned to the town for a ballot question. And I think, there's an expression that I've heard Mr. McCoy use over the years, it's got to be called a ball or a strike. And frankly, I don't know which way town council is going to call it. If town council says that the petition article the motion for your article can properly be brought to town meeting and subsequently be submitted to the state legislature and come back on the ballot box, then that's great. We would have not needed this process. But since the article doesn't specify that it's asking and directing the selectmen to submit that result to the legislature and then to be returned, I figure it's worth having in there just as a fail-safe. Does that make sense?
I knew there was an involved process down the road, but I didn't know quite what it was, and so I was actually asking the question, because it may make more sense for the Board of Selectmen to move forward with it. It was just my own mind. And the meeting coming up on the 15th, perhaps at that time it can be discussed more.
Yeah, as long as it gets to the floor, bottom line is, as long as it gets to the floor, I don't think there's a bit of difference. You know?
Thank you.
That good? Public comments? New business committee reports?
All set, thank you.
Anything down there? You good? Board and dates?
Again, a reminder that tomorrow, March 1, Finance Committee meeting meets here, room 9 at the Town Hall to discuss Wilmington Public Schools and the Shawshene Technical High School budget. March 2nd, the High School Building Committee meets at the High School Library at 6:30 p.m. It's a public meeting. March 14th is the Board of Selectmen's public hearing relative to the acceptance of streets. This continues the process that we began today, and that will be held in conjunction with the Selectmen's meeting. And then on the next day, March 15th, is the Finance Committee Planning Board joint public hearing relative to the warrant for the annual town meeting. That's at the Town Hall Auditorium, and it begins at 7 p.m.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to go to executive session for the purpose of discussing collective bargaining, not to return to open session.
So moved.
Motion made.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Unanimous? Thank you. Roll call vote, I'm sorry, we need a roll call vote for that.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Good pickup. What do we?